Kristen, and good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many familiar names and some new ones pop in. I wish this job was rounding everyone up from the coffee station, but instead it's calling us to order on a Zoom meeting. So good morning. As Kristen said, my name is Joe Short. I'm actually the vice president of the Northern Forest Center. And for those of you who don't know us, we're a regional innovation and investment partner. We work to create rural vibrancy by connecting people, economy, and the forest landscape. We work across 4 states. I'm sitting in New Hampshire this morning, but we also work across most of Vermont and northern Maine and the Adirondack North Country in New York. A big part of our work is growing forest-based businesses and strengthening rural communities. And for that reason, we have worked for over a decade with partners in outdoor recreation and tourism across the region, and convening this initiative is part of that work. I doubt I need to say to this audience that tourism and recreation is a pretty foundational part of the economy in the Northern Forest region. And I also think it's fair to say that the past year has really highlighted both sides of that coin. On one hand, I think we've seen businesses and communities that depend on tourism be particularly hard hit by pandemic travel restrictions and all that come with them. And that's pointed to the importance of tourism as part of a diversified economic development strategy for rural places. On the other hand, I know many of us have seen demand on the recreational amenities of our region reach new heights. That demand was already increasing pre-pandemic and has increased even more so. And that has highlighted questions about what does sustainable tourism look like for both communities and the landscape. And these are all themes that we're going to explore through this morning and subsequent modules. So along those lines, this program, the Rural Tourism Academy, is designed to inspire and support collaborative regional approaches to recreation destination development to hopefully make it more strategic, efficient, and effective at helping communities leverage their natural amenities for community development, for workforce attraction, and for business benefits. And as you'll hear shortly, today's program is just the start of work that will continue through the fall. This academy has a focus on Coos County here in New Hampshire and the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont, Essex, Caledonia, and Orleans counties. But it's based on very similar programming that we developed and have run for a number of years over in Maine in partnership with the Maine Office of Tourism. And we really hope that what you hear and learn this morning entices you to join us again in a few weeks for Module 2, and then to stay tuned for programming that will hopefully, we really hope, be in person and in community by the fall. Before I hand over the screen, a few introductions and thank you. A huge thank you to our advisory group, local partners who have helped make sure that this program feels relevant and who have identified all of you as really key people to reach out to. That group includes Abby Long, Carrie Crozier, Jessica Savage, Dave Snedeker, Michelle Morin-Gray, Phil Bryce, Jody Freed, Jackie Dagger, Denise Valley, and Jody Gilbert. So thank you to that group. The center team supporting this work is Amy Scott, Mike Wilson, Julie Evans, and we also have Maura Adams and Leslie Carrison running digital interference this morning, making sure this call goes smoothly. Thank you to that group. And also a big thank you to the funders who have made this possible, in particular the Northern Border Regional Commission and USDA Rural Development. Finally, we are thrilled to be working with 2 really accomplished experts in this field. You've already met Kristen Dahl, and I'd also like to introduce her colleague, David Burrell, who are our partners in designing and delivering this work. So thank you all again for joining us this morning. And David, I will pass the screen to you.
Okay, Joe. Well, thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. So looking forward to diving into this program with you. I'm going to take just a few minutes at the start here to sort of set a bit of a context and then start to lead us into talking about future trends, and then Russell will take us from there. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Right, so you should see my screen up there, right? So, and this is actually the landing page of the portal. So my point of putting this here is that all the information that we developed through the course of these Rural Tourism Academy and the various modules will all be posted on the portal, right? So that's where there'll be places to go to register. There'll be reports there, videos from these sessions and so on. But that's going to be a go-to sort of resource for this program. couple of, just to hit on a couple of things, I do want to just call out, I think this is a really exciting program, right? I know Joe kind of gave us a bit of the background about the funders and the focus area, being the sort of Northeast Kingdom and Northern New Hampshire and so on. But this does build on some work that the Northern Forest Centre has been doing in Maine for some time, and Mike Wilson and I were involved in that. But I guess I've worked in tourism development as well as all sorts of other sort of planning exercises for several decades. And I think these types of programs like this Rural Tourism Academy, it's very exciting to think that we're at the start of this, but then to think about what might be the outcome by the time we get to the end of it. And these programs are very much orientated towards being sort of action learning or action application. So the idea is really to use this as a framework to help the region be able to develop a better, more viable, robust, sustainable tourism industry going forward. And I want to talk a little about that in my comments here. Just a couple of sort of pegs in the sand here. We know that outdoor adventure and outdoor tourism is really important in the Northern Forest region. It's pretty key to local economic development strategies. And we're going to start to talk about various sort of terms as we go through this. So one is about destination development, and we'll hear sort of conversations about sustainable tourism and regenerative tourism and so on. But destination development is this idea of an approach to community and economic revitalisation that builds on a variety of assets and not just traditional tourism elements, but we've got to be thinking about how do we attract economic activity, so visitors, and improving the quality of life for residents. And I want to talk more about this balance between the local impact and the visitor experience as we go through these initial remarks. And in the work we've done in a lot of rural and regional tourism economies, it seems that there's a real kind of balance point that has to get struck, right? And, Joe in his opening remarks made the point that, a lot of destinations both enjoy the influx of visitors and the sort of vitality and the economic benefit that it brings, but can also be struggling with that surge of numbers, because it's not always even. And in the work we've done in rural areas, this slide to me boils down right to the heart of what I think is the challenge, which is how do you get this balance right? And on one side, you have industry value. So you have a perception that tourism is important, it creates economic activity, it creates jobs. Often the tourism product in an outdoor area or regional area is built on local values and traditional industries. So for example, it may be, trails through forests, or, in your case, there's obviously a lot of private land. So you have people who are using that, but it's built on that sort of infrastructure, and you have often a very high quality underlying resource in terms of a natural landscape. In other words, it's beautiful, right? And it's really great to be there. So these are the sort of industry value components, that it brings opportunity and it leverages your underlying resource. The other side of this, though, is often, what you might call community impacts. And there can be negative environmental impacts, and this can be a concern, particularly for older people who are not associated in the industry. They might see, overuse of certain areas. Sometimes communities are struggling, and services struggle to cope with the rate of the influx. And then you can even get to the point where you have this emerging disruption of people's quality of life and contentment at a locals level. And so this kind of balancing act is really critical. And I think what this Rural Tourism Academy is the opportunity to do is to think about what does the correct, perfect balance look like for you in your region, and thinking about that both now and in the future. And part of what we want to talk about in a moment is some sort of future trends. And in all probability, tourism will grow. So how do you start to think about making sure that you're on a trajectory where the balance is able to be created now, but you're also able to sustain that going forward? And one of the models that we find is really the way out of this sort of growth paradox, which is, tourism grows, but then it brings these sort of unintended consequences. The way out of that is really thinking through a lens of sustainable tourism. And that's really fundamentally built around thinking about pivoting to impact management. So thinking about how you manage the impact of tourism on the communities, on the landscape and on the local infrastructure, and building collaborative solutions, because we don't have, there aren't checkpoints and gates where you can stop people. So working together as a region becomes really important. The sustainable tourism, just as a working definition, right? And this conversation actually is really interesting because it's evolving quite a lot at the moment. There's a lot of discussion going on around the world in the tourism sectors about how do we build sustainable tourism and how do we evolve that into things like regenerative tourism and so on. But the sort of working definition, you can look at lots of different definitions, but the one that Kristen and I have sort of boiled down over plenty of effort, right, is really comes down to 5 points, right, is thinking about how do you build a tourism industry that's got the right balance, but takes these things into account. So one, that it's integrated with local communities. So you guys don't want to be a prop in a sideshow, right? So you want to have tourism be integrated with you in a way that's respectful and sort of matches your cadence and your ethos and your values as a community. The second one, that it provides visitors with an authentic place-based educational experience. Obviously we want visitors to walk away having had a great experience in that region and perhaps having learnt something about your region and what you do. The third one, it's about creating lasting financial and social benefits for residents, businesses and communities across the region. So in other words, it's about lasting benefits is the key point, right? That it's not just somebody comes in, grabs a whole bunch of sort of benefit from tourism and goes, but it distributes the benefit through the local economy and through the local people. 4, supported by public policies with organisational support and funding, and you're really lucky, in my view, to have the Northern Forest Centre there as an organisation that's helping corral this, but there will be others that are involved in this space, of course. And 5, maintains the health and vibrancy of our natural environment. So they're the sort of 5 key elements of this working definition around sustainable tourism. And our sort of suggestion as we go through this planning process and through this Tourism Academy is to be thinking about what does the perfect balance look like for you now and in the future, and how does that translate, and what does that look like as a sustainable tourism model for your region. So just to the program design a little. So this is a new program that's being launched, and as I said, I think it's pretty damn exciting, right? It's great to have sort of a new focus, and I think the number of people who registered and turned up sort of reflects that this is a really good time for this conversation. In the design of this, we were trying to take into account that we were in the midst of a pandemic when we started it. So we've broken it into 2 major phases. So one is this phase in May, which we're doing virtually. The first module is the future trends, which is today, and exploring that and exploring sustainable tourism examples and lessons. And we've got a great program to walk us through today on that. The next module in 2 weeks' time is around future scenario planning for the tourism sector in the region, and really starting to develop a bit of a plan and thinking about what does that perfect balance look like for you in the future. So we're able to use these modules virtually. While it may not be the absolute ideal format, we can make a lot of headway in a virtual format with these. Then the phase 2, which is intended to be sort of late fall, early winter, is then really getting into sleeves rolled up and some real strong local planning, really thinking about, how do you turn this into an action plan on the ground? What needs to happen? Then of course there's, projects that will fall out of that. So I think this is about the best possible design we could come up with in terms of the circumstances. And hopefully many of you will track through from the future trends module into our regional planning module in 2 weeks, and then obviously be able to bring your communities into the next phase as well. But I did want to just pivot for a second on and talk about some sort of emerging trends in tourism. That's sort of part of what we wanted to cover today. I'm just going to hit a few high level points, and then I'm going to ask Russell to come in and talk about some data from ATTA. So let's talk about some forces impacting tourism trends, in the world. So what are some of these emerging macro drivers? I'm going to start really big, right? Because I think we're actually in a world these days that things that happen in the world have an impact with us locally. The first one I want to talk about is mass urbanisation. And I think this has all sorts of future implications for any outdoor recreation region, right? So this is 1950 data. it's a map of the world. So you have North America, Europe, and Asia. The size of the circles represents the number of people who live in cities of over 100,000 people in 1950. And the colours talk about the relative degree of urbanisation of the society. So England here was, over 75% urbanised and so on. But in 1950, the US had 100 million people living in cities, and the urban population was 64% of the total population. Why I started in 1950 is because I think between 1950 and 2050, in that century, we are making a huge pivot as humanity, going from primarily an agrarian living species to an urban dwelling species, right? And I'm talking to you as a group of people who are in an agrarian environment, so outdoors, right? Farming, sort of resource economy and so on, and probably in a lot of small communities. And probably the infrastructure is very similar to what it was in 1950. But the world's population and how it's distributed is changing. So that's 1950. 2020, let me just toggle back so you can see that, 1950, 2020. So bang, right? This massive expansion in the size of cities globally. The US now has nearly 300 million people living in urban environments, 85% urbanized, but across the world it's just like exploding, right? And just to give you an idea, we're adding 50,000 people a week to cities in America, and we will do that for the next 30 years. And that's 50,000 net, right? So, and that's a function of people being born in cities, moving to cities and so on. If we go forward, that's 2050, right? So that's this pivot, this massive transition of human beings going into these city environments. Has all sorts of implications. So all of a sudden you have these massive city populations and people want to get out, right? So what they do is jump on these trips and go to recreation places around the world. And the big underlying issue here is that, when the jet age started in 1960, there was 25 million international trips. And in 2017, it was 1.3 billion, right? And sure, that's taken a hit now, but it will be back with force, right? And so what we have is this huge growing global tourism and people distributing differently. And so you have this real paradox, is that can tourism ever really truly be sustainable when you have billions of people on the planet? Most of them are concentrated in cities, and most of them are going to be looking for escapes from those environments in different ways. And I think if you think about it in terms of a geographic context, in say North America, people are gravitating these mega cities, right? And you can think of the sort of, the whole cluster of them across the countryside, Boston and Chicago and, Minneapolis and so on, Kansas City and all these big metropolises. They have these suburban rings, big peri-urban spaces. And then there's often this sort of larger sort of agricultural resource production zone. So it's forestry, farming and so on. And increasingly, as people are concentrating into these city environments, they're recreating out in these production zones. And so you see this effect where these people swarm out of these cities in a sort of a 2 or 3 hour radius for these recreation experiences. And the big question, I think, as we think about balance is, do these outdoor recreation areas, and you're in in one of those, right? And places closer into Boston are even more so. But are these economic opportunities, or are they tourism blast zones? And I've certainly seen communities that were rural communities on the edge of big cities that start to just get hammered by this wave of people coming out from the cities. And of course, what happens is, the people are going to be concentrating in cities, but it means they're going to be increasingly seeking to escape for outdoor experiences. But they're not necessarily going to come with the skills of being used to being in an outdoor environment. So that changes what you have to think about as people come to your region. And I know this is like big picture and looking out into the future, but that's what I wanted to kind of kick off with. The other part that I think is a really important as we think forward, right? So if you think into what does balance look like in the future, is we're in a decade now, the 20s, where we're going to have some really profound societal change. And it's going to be driven by this, which is the age pyramid of the US. So you have the baby boomers and the millennials. And in the next decade, we're going to see a real cycling through of society. And it's going to bring really substantial societal value shift. So I show these kind of things just as a bit of a joke sometimes, because, you know, the one on the left says blow on her face and she'll follow you anywhere. And the other one's like, when should babies start drinking cola? And, you know, we kind of look at that and laugh now, but that was considered really contemporary smart advertising not that long ago, right? So, but societal values shifted. And so when we have this sort of generational change coming in the next decade, where we see a lot stronger emergence of the younger generations, what new societal values are they going to bring? What different kinds of expectations will they have? And if you want to just take one example, you know, you can basically read an article every week about, you know, a major restaurant in New York going into vegan menus, or, you know, the emergence of all sorts of things, you know, renewable energies, all sorts of heightened sensitivities that are reflecting shifting societal values, you know, equity and inclusion and diversity and those type of things. And it does mean that the type of visitor coming in the future is going to have different thoughts and different desires and different expectations of the destination. All right, so that's just some high level stuff, right? So I wanted to now hand off to Russell. So Russell Walters is the Regional Director of the Adventure Travel Trade Association. Many of you may know Russell. He's also based in Maine and runs an operation there, and a outdoor recreation outfit. And Russell just is one of those people who is able to kind of go from the big global picture in his role with ATTA right down to very practical sort of tourism destination development at a very local level. So Russell, can I hand this across to you? I can run your slides from here, but if I can hand this across to you to pick up and walk us through your thoughts on some of the emerging trends in travel, outdoor recreation.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. And welcome, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this really unique and worthy, wonderful endeavor. As David said, my name is Russell Walters, Regional Director for North America for the Adventure Travel Trade Association. And I don't want that word adventure travel to sort of scare people off. You know, some of you may have this definition of adventure travel, you know, climbing extreme cliffs or kayaking off of waterfalls. Our definition, David, I don't know if you can move along to my slide deck. There you go. Our definition of adventure travel is travel having three components: active, in nature, incorporating cultural or interpretive elements. Could be foods, crafts, traditions, history, events. To do just one of those things is essentially just recreation, right? If we're just hiking, then that's just recreation. Adventure travel is about trying to combine multiple elements to recognize high value tourism and the sense of place that a place brings to us. And so I'm going to give you, my job is to set some context locally, really, I think regionally, and give a few anecdotal notes from the past 18 months. And we all know what an 18 months it's been, right? And, you know, what I have seen, and as David mentioned, I am based in Maine. I run an outdoor adventure company in Maine. And some of these reflect those observations. Some of it reflects stuff from the ATTA. Is that we've seen this flight the last 14 months particularly. It was starting, as Joe said, it was starting before that, but we've seen this flight to nature, the flight to rural sanctuaries, people wanting to get out and come to these places that we live in and cherish so strongly. And they're not always necessarily prepared, those visitors that we bring in. So, you know, that's part of that's part of what's going on. I've also seen self-guided. We're looking at self-guided, self-supported. Family pods clearly was something that came out of last year. You know, where people want to stay safe in their own pods, in larger accommodations. Camping started to see a dramatic increase as everyone, you know, felt safe in the fresh air, in the open air. So you know, those are more trends that we're seeing. Van life, hip camp, places where people can camp necessarily perhaps on a farm, where wasn't an established campsite, perhaps as we might have seen in the past, but some of these springing up places. All these types of things are adding pressure. Food is not necessarily an afterthought. Food is something within the adventure travel community, within the tourism community, that is really at it's part of what is bringing people into these places. And it doesn't necessarily, I think actually, David or Kristen, if we could go back one slide. There you go. Thank you. It doesn't have to necessarily be gourmet food, but it does have to be local. It should be fresh. There should be a story associated with it. Where did it come from? Who grew it? What was their story? So adding back into context. And then finally, a trend that we've seen of the last 14 months, 18 months is adventure appeals. I think we think of this as sort of a young person's domain, but there's an appeal in adventure that is a wide range of ages. Millennials, we all know millennials, and millennials are people too. Millennials value experience over things. They've got their young families. They want to be out there, and they want to get out and move away from some of the previous norms. Boomers, they have money. They grew up jogging. They grew up in aerobics with their strange socks and things, but they still want to be out there. They still want to be active, and they've got the money, they've got the time. So we've got this large range of ages that we can accommodate in this adventure travel opportunity. If we could just move to the next slide, please. And this next slide is some hot trending types of trips. This came from some 2020 survey work that we did to our operators. We have some 1,100, 1,300 members, member companies, 30,000 community members in the ATTA, and this was a lot of their response. And you can see, and this is nothing new if you're living in the world of tourism in rural communities today, but nothing necessarily new, but it just calibrates and perhaps confirms some things that you're seeing in your local community. People are looking for custom itineraries. They don't want the standard. They want something that you can create for them. Greener, we've talked about greener, sustainable, low impact. I'm going to skip over electric bikes for a second. Expert or specialist guided trips. Take them. They've got little time, but they want to be taken to the special places. Remote destinations. Wellness, not just meaning, getting out there and physical wellness, but mindful wellness. Just the being out in nature, clearing our heads a little bit. And the opportunity for self-guided. People don't always want to be held by the hand. So there's the two types of that. There's a couple of thoughts there. Some of it is they want to be held by the hand. They want custom itineraries with expert guides. And the other is some of them, they just want to go off and discover it on their own. So that creates all kinds of new problems. How do we create signage? How do we create opportunities for them to do that? And then that number 3 is these electric bikes that we're starting to see. If we could snap to the next slide. So that was the trips. These are the types of activities, and you're going to see some sort of overlap in this. Again, this is trending information from 2020 from our membership. So hiking, trekking, walking, out in nature. That's great. I mean, there's plenty of that available in our regions. Culinary, gastronomy, cultural, wellness again. Kayaking, not so much expedition cruising up this way, but people getting out there, wildlife viewing, photography. Again, you've got this electric bike thing, and I want to kind of just tie into that a little bit, because I know if New Hampshire, Vermont, or anything like Maine, part of our seasonality, part of our appeal is we've got both these human-powered opportunities, and then we've got motorized opportunities. I myself run a resort that appeals in the winter to snowmobilers, and we're seeing, that same motor crowd in the summer now with the advent of ATVs. And those two things create some level of tension already. I'm going to think to the future a little bit and say, think about what the electric bike will do. Think about what that opportunity is, and think about some of the challenges that it will bring to us. It's sort of a game changer. In Europe, what we're seeing is 50% of the bikes that are sold to tour operators. So think about that. For tour operators, were the perhaps the purists, the people that started the cycling, companies. 50% of the bikes that were sold to tour operators in the last couple of years have been electric. So that trend is coming, and something that maybe we're not seeing necessarily right now, but something that we need to consider as we think about these planning processes for the future. If we could just move to the next slide, please. This is from that same survey, and just a couple of other things as well as trips and tours and activities. People are looking for, David's mentioned it a couple of times, Joe mentioned it, I think, sustainable. So companies, guides, tour operators, communities are working towards sustainability certifications so that they can be delivering the product in the right way, considering the right elements. And I think also we often forget in some of our sleepy little towns where we prefer people to do everything face to face. We've always had that face to face impact. That online is a huge opportunity for taking these bookings. If we're going to be planning these things, if we're going to be reaching out to consumers, if we're going to be reaching out to people, reaching them where they're at, then we need to have the tools available for people to be able to book and interact with us that way. That's not something we always think about when we're delivering and thinking about tourism. We're thinking about the delivery of the program on the ground. But I would tell us that I think that we also need to develop that infrastructure of online capability, whether that means education, technical assistance, etc. If we could move to the next slide. Thank you. I'm hesitant to label the next few things as solutions, because they may not necessarily be solutions where you're living, where you're thinking about what you're thinking about. But I would like us, as you go through the next couple of hours and beyond, to have these things top of mind, because they are out there. And these are considerations. David's already mentioned it. How are we truly going to involve our stakeholders, our community stakeholders? Tourism across the board. It doesn't matter if you're in Oregon, if you're in California, Quebec, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire. Tourism across the board is this double-edged sword of, are we looking at economic benefit or intrusion into our homes, into our communities? And we've really got to understand that if we're going to be the high value, well-respected tourism community that we really want to be. In the past, we have talked about destination management and destination marketing. Over the last few years, I would say there's been such a focus on destination marketing. We've got to learn how to market our places, our regions, our towns, our communities. And more, what we're learning is that, we may have over promoted. We could be guilty of over promoting and over marketing. And now we've got to learn how to manage these destinations. Maybe it's by capacity limits. Maybe it's through pricing. Maybe it's by passes. All of those things controversial in and of themselves, but something that we've got to manage and got to understand if we're going to create these communities that we want to live in. I live in a small community. I want to welcome people into my community, And I want to be proud to live and work in tourism and not have to hide my head when I go to the grocery store. And so those are things that we're going to have to think about as we consider these sorts of planning ideals. I talk about deepen and diversification. And I use guides and outfitters and curators in, also not a big fan of the word curation, but we can diversify where we take people to. We've all probably in our own community got that special waterfall, that special hike, that special place that's overrun. But through careful consideration, we can create other trails or using guides and operators to take people out safely into new places. So diversify where we take people and use that knowledge to deepen our guests' understanding of the location, our place, the sensibilities of that place, the education around that place, the history of that place. So really think about adventure travel, really think about tourism as an opportunity to make these deeper level understandings, deeper level commitments to our region. The other consideration I'm going to just throw at us for a second is this concept of innovation and investment. Innovation in climate, in sustainability. We've heard sustainability now a number of times, and innovation and investment in the recreational assets. People, tourists are discriminating. They have incredible expectations today, perhaps in some cases overly exuberant opportunities and thoughts and expectations. So, we really need to think about how are we going to deliver really great product, really great opportunities for them. And that innovation and that investment, it also comes at the level of technology too, to the booking systems and how we reach out to people. I think that's something that's often understood. And I know I've got about 30 seconds, so I'm going to skip through the last little pieces. That innovation and investment is being made, and I want to give this point, at the tour operator level today. Because of the pandemic, we have seen global companies like Intrepid, a giant Australian company, G Adventures with an office down in Boston, and REI, all creating purposeful North American product itineraries and trips in the last year. REI has made a statement that they are going to offer experiences to 3 million people in the next few years as part of their goal. So something for us all to be really thinking about. That investment is being made. One last slide, please. And then I'll just leave you this from Shannon Stowell, the president CEO of the ATTA. We feel confident that the travel industry as a whole is on a path to recovery. Adventure travel in nature is well suited to these trends and socially distance activities. So with that, I hope that was helpful, and I look forward to some questions, and I look forward to spending a little bit more of the morning learning about your region. Thank you.
All right, Russell. So thank you very much, Russell. That's fantastic, right? And so for everybody too, these slides we're going to post to the project portal, so they'll be there available as a resource. And what we wanted to try and accomplish in this first session was really just sort of set the stage of big picture, right? So, we want to go into this Rural Tourism Academy with that big frame in mind and sort of start to wrestle with these kind of grand challenges that regions like yours faces as we go through this. So we're happy to take Q&A on chat, so we can run that, and Russell and I can respond to that. But we want to just keep this program rolling along. So I'm going to hand it back to Kristen now, who's going to set us up for just a very super lightning transition to our next panel. But I just want to end up by saying, Russell, thank you so much. It's always a thrill to have you bring your global expertise and your local knowledge to apply in these type of conversations. I think that really helps to have that huge balance that you have of that, that span of the topic. So thank you very much.